There is yet another grave problem associated with incineration. What is to be done with the garbage that doesn't completely burn? The slag.
You know, you have a number of toxic substances in municipal solid waste. You have mercury from the batteries that you use in your watch and in your transistor radios. You've got all kinds of plastics. You've got other types of heavy metals, including lead and cadmium and all kinds of nasty substances. When you burn garbage, you don't get rid of those nasty substances. You simply concentrate them in the slag and the fly ash that's left over when you're finished burning the garbage. If you're efficient about removing those toxins from the stack gases so that they don't get out the stack and expose everybody, you simply concentrate them in the residue. Then you've got to landfill the residue. Some of those pollutants are made more water soluble in the incineration process. Copper and, I believe, mercury are two substances that are actually probably more difficult to handle from an environmental point of view after you burn garbage than before. So when you then go to dispose of this residue, 25% of the waste that you started with by weight, in a landfill site, you may have the same problems that you would have had, and perhaps in some respects worse problems than had you just simply landfilled the garbage.
The Environmental Defense Fund in the United States, several American states, West Germany, Sweden, and Japan treat incinerator slag as toxic, hazardous waste. In West Germany, the slag is buried in abandoned salt mines. Some incinerators in that country have been forced to close, as they didn't have adequate facilities to store the toxic fly ash. In Japan, the slag is mixed with concrete, placed in a special Class A landfill site, and the liquid affluent channeled into a special treatment plant. In Philadelphia, the cost of safely disposing of this toxic slag at nearby hazardous waste dumps became so high that it is now shipped to Panama. The slag from the Descarrières incinerator is presently being hauled off to the eastern tip of Montreal Island to be dumped at the Rivière des Prairies landfill site. The slag, which contains heavy metals and dioxins, is left exposed to the elements and seeps into the groundwater. Plans have been made to turn the Rivière des Prairies dump into a recreational ski hill once the slag has been piled up high enough.
But all of the studies indicate it's a question of dollars and cents. It's not a question of theoretical, ideological commitment. And the cheapest method by far is finding a place where you can bury it. That's the cheapest, and all the studies show that. But there's just a limit. It's not the most environmentally satisfactory methods, but that is the cheapest. And the most expensive of all the systems is incineration. But we have an incinerator.
The Rivière des Prairies landfill site is not the only dump on the island of Montreal. 80% of the island's municipal waste is dumped at one of North America's largest landfill sites, the Myron Quarry. The quarry receives an estimated 1.2 million tons of consumer waste each year. At the present rate of disposal, the quarry should be filled up by the year 1995, if not sooner. Once this hole is filled, it will leave the surrounding municipalities who use the dump the dilemma of finding another acceptable landfill site or building new incinerators.
It's ridiculous for us to make $100 million commitments to these facilities when they may be far worse environmentally and cost twice as much as other options available to us. And of course, from the community's perspective, the best choice is recycling. You know, let's reduce waste so that we don't have the horrible environmental costs associated with either burning it or landfilling it. Recycling.
Recycling is possible on a large scale. Japan recycles 60% of its municipal waste. Cities in West Germany and Austria also recycle 60%. Recycling can create 6 times more jobs compared with landfill or incineration systems. Recycling is also the least expensive method of dealing with waste. It reduces our society's need to harvest our precious few remaining natural resources. In Montreal at present, there are a few drop-off centers handling paper and bottles. The city has put very little money into developing any sort of recycling program. There are plans to develop recycling pilot projects in the upcoming years. At a public meeting on recycling, attended by Mr. Feinstadt, one Montreal resident spoke out on the current situation of recycling in Montreal.
When we always talk about economics, not about being profitable, I think there's the environmental point of view. Personally, I feel like an ecologist, and I think that every day is another day of more pollution. So I think an important city like Montreal, and I realize, of course, it's not your mistake. After all, we had 20 years of bad government in that respect. But, putting it again on a long bank and saying, okay, in a couple of months, in a year or two, I think there's a need now. And the pollution is already big enough that we have to do something with an urgency, not just saying, a pilot project in 1 year. This is my feeling that, we always think about making profitable, right? But what about the environmental point of view? I think a lot of people, they don't consider that enough. And I think there's a willingness of the population to participate, to do something. I see it in my neighborhood. And I know a lot of people feel like me, so I'm disappointed that, your government says, well, next year perhaps, and next year you might hear another 6 months. I think it's typical political bungling.
Recycling systems are quite complex and require a great deal of thinking if they are to be implemented effectively. They cannot survive on government handouts and small grants. If a municipality sets a goal of recycling 50% of its waste, then it must allocate 50% of its solid waste budget for recycling. As it stands now, recycling will remain on the back burner, so to speak, for quite some time. The city plans to run the Descarrières incinerator until at least the year 2005. To maintain its commitment of supplying electricity to local industry, the incinerator will have to burn 90% of the city's waste. With more and more consumer products being made with plastics, the dioxin problem can only increase. This leaves the individual consumer to question the need of continually buying these products. It also leaves us, as a society, the question of whether or not we choose to remain silent and continue to accept the toxic clouds as permanent fixtures of our cityscape.